All right, our table is looking pretty good. We've got the headers, we've got rows of records in there, or at least rows ready for records. We've got the expense with the drop down in there, pulling from that list. But there's one little hiccup here that I want to make sure we tackle. Our lists, it's great, right? Grabbing the values from those 3 tables on the monthly expense dashboard so that we can create the data validation list, but it is lacking. And I'm going to show you where it's lacking at and how to fix this. Watch this. We've got our list. It's created, and we got the little drop down, and it lists out all of those values right there. Well, what if I hop over to the monthly expense dashboard for a moment and I add something? Let's say I add another subscription. So I hop over here and let's say we got HBO. All right, I'll hit my enter key. There's my HBO entry there. I'll go back to my expense tracker. Let's see, there's HBO right there. I go to my little expense column. I drop down here, starts at car. Remember, we sorted this alphabetically. And I go down and look, there's HBO. Everything looks good. If I scroll down now, my very last entry in here is now water. But if I look at my original list, my last entry is actually yard work. I don't want to do yard work anyway, so maybe it doesn't matter, right? We can overlook that. No big deal, right? Well, you know what? We should include it. We should put it in there. But our data validation list isn't dynamic enough to pull out new entries. I mean, it pulled out a new entry, HBO, but it pushed something off. Right? It pushed that off the bottom of that list. Because our data validation, if I highlight all those cells again, data validation, it's looking at a literal range, right? I3 to I20. Yard work landed in row 21. So we need to make this more dynamic. We need it to pick up anytime there's a new entry here. The way that we're going to do this is by utilizing 2 functions as our source, this right here, inside of our data validation. We're going to use the offset function and the COUNTA function. Now, if you haven't used the offset function or COUNTA is pretty straightforward. We'll talk about that. The offset function's a little bit more involved, and I'm going to give you a quick introduction into the offset function. So let's take a look. So I'm going to hop over just to an empty cell, close that, find an empty cell here, and I'm just going to type in equals offset. I'm just going to use this visually so we can see what the function's all about. Open up a parentheses. Now, the offset function has 4 things, or excuse me, it's got 5 things. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 different things that it wants from us in order for it to do its job. Now, remember, our main purpose here is to make our drop down reference this list more dynamically. So we need a way to make the range, remember A3 or I3 to I21, we need to make that more dynamic because it can increase, it can decrease in size. We need to make that dynamic. Well, in order to do that, the offset function will allow us to say, start at this point, that's the reference. Start at cell I3. Start right there. That's where you're always going to start. But then we're going to give it a height value. We're going to tell it, okay, you're going to go from I3 down to the last cell that contains data. Find that cell. Okay? So it'll say, okay, I3 is where I'll start, and I'm going to offset down till I get to this height. Now, we can't give the literal height. We can't say, oh, it's 20 rows in height or it's 30 rows in height because that's going to change, right, based on the other worksheets. So here we need to use another function that will count how many values are in that column. All right, and this is where the COUNTA function comes into play. Let's try this out. We're going to put all of this together, but that's generally, in a little nutshell, just really quick introduction, that's the offset function. It says, where am I going to start and how many rows, how many columns do you want, or how high do you want this to be, or what's the width of this thing? How big do you want it to be? That's the offset command. Let's try it out. So to do this, I'm going to select all those cells once again. This is what we want to change, the data validation for these cells. I'll go to data, data validation, and I'm going to wipe out the source here. We don't want that source anymore because that was a hard-coded, hard range inside there. We need it to be dynamic. So now I'm going to bring in equals offset, and I'm going to open a parentheses. Now the first thing inside the offset command it wants to know is where does it start? Where's it going to offset from? So I'm going to go grab the top of my list, which is I3. Yep, I3. I'll grab that. That's the reference point for the offset command. Then I'm going to do a comma. Now, unfortunately, you don't get to see the little screen tips inside this window, but I'm going to remind you. So the next one is the rows. It says, okay, I'm going to start here. Now, how many rows do you want? Well, actually, we can't tell you how many rows because it's going to change. So I'm going to leave that blank. I'm going to do another comma. The next thing it wants to know is, well, how many columns do you want? Well, once again, we've only got one column, but I'm not going to explicitly call this out. So I'm just going to do another comma. We're just going to leave them blank and it'll set to defaults to whatever the function utilizes there. Okay. Next thing is, and this one we're going to use, is the height. How big is this range of cells going to be? Well, here I'm going to use the count A function. Now the count A function is now going to take a range and count how many cells are in that range that contain data. So here I'll say just the I column. Just grab how many cells, count how many cells we have inside of there that contain data. Oh, and actually before I do that, I should open up a parentheses for the count A. So now I'll grab the I column and it just references I to I, which is great because remember this is going to change in size. Now I'm going to close the parentheses for the count A function and I'm going to close the parentheses for the offset function. And I'm done. I'll hit OK. No errors. If I had an error in the formula, it would have told me right there. But now if I go to my dropdown, I start with car and I end with yard work. Pretty cool. And if I go back to monthly expenses, let's say I add another bill here. Let's see, what do I not have so far? Let's say we got health insurance. I'll hit my enter key. Let's just drop that one in there. I need to increase the width of that column. I'll go back to expense tracker. There's my health insurance. It's in there. Yard work got pushed down one cell. But if I go to my drop down, starts with car, there's health insurance, and I still got yard work in there. So this is creating a little more dynamic. There's, again, a few moving parts inside of here because now we got the offset function and we got the count A to count how many values are in there and how big that range from the offset cell should be. So try this out. Rewind the video, highlight those cells, modify your data validation list to utilize that offset command. Then I'll open that back up right there. Make sure you try it out.